not talking that much about immortality today, right? It's just a title who I took over from another conference who said, hey, titles need to be engaging, and all these boring talks about, just pure tech titles, the title needs to be something a bit more hot. But of course, in principle, this is what we're working on, right? In principle, and of course, we had some longevity talks today already, where the movement in the field is kind of moving away from standard healthcare, or at least trying to move away from standard healthcare to what I would argue is a more high impact approach. As I just said, so I come from medicine. This was always my plan. I studied medicine to go into the longevity space. I never felt like dying is a particularly great idea. And at least it should be up to everybody to decide when and if they would like to die. So this is why I went into cancer research, and then very quickly got disillusioned with academic research, then the tech companies, and now we're kind of back at the overlap of tech and biotech. And now the big question, of course, is, medical research has been going on for crazy long amounts of time, right? The cancer research, the war on cancer, this is was my field in the past. The war on cancer has been going on for about 40-something years. And of course, the initial goal was to get rid of cancer pretty quick. And of course, we're far, far from it. So the question really is, why is this taking so long? And I think the reason is really this. Biology is just extremely complex, right? This is just a small part of all the metabolic processes and everything. And of course, it's difficult to read because it's very fine print.
Is that from EcoStat?
I'm not exactly sure whether that's very possible. There's multiple of these. I think this might be the one from Pfizer. There's multiple of these graphs, but in any case, the story is always, it's super complex. Tinkering around with the system is very, very difficult. If you change something on one end, a lot of stuff happens on the other side. So it's not like there's not enough money in this. In the DeSci space and the longevity space, there might not be enough money, but in the healthcare space, arguably there is a good amount of money, but it's just very, very, very complex. And if you ask people, hey, would you actually like to live longer? This is one of the studies that we did a while ago. And there's a crazy amount, or it's not a majority, but it's a good amount of people who would even go for these very aggressive statements saying, I would like to live indefinitely. Right? Still not immortality. Immortality is very, very long, and I would even argue a non-scientific kind of approach. But it's a crazy amount of people who would like to live significantly longer than currently possible. And at the same time, a tremendous amount of people die every day, right? Like in 10 years, more than 500 million people die currently. Now, if you look at this space, I think you kind of can subdivide that, if you look at a Venn diagram, into 3 big groups. Everybody's into health, right? Everybody wants to be healthy. Then there's now more and more people who say, hey, listen, I also want to be, I'm pretty sure this is even the majority, if not almost everybody, who want to say, I would like to be healthy, fit, physically, mentally, when I'm 85, when I'm 90, when I'm old, right? To not have this period of morbidity at the end of the life where life quality is low and so on. Everybody, at least almost everybody, of course, agrees with that. And then within that group, there's a smaller group who says, well, yeah, sure, I absolutely want to be healthy when I'm 85, but I also would like to have the chance to live longer. Arguably, I would like to have, and this is kind of where I think my position would fall into, if I'm 85 and I so choose, if I say at 85 I would like to do another 10 years, then it would be great to do that. And if after 9 of those years I would say, well, I'll take another 10, then that should be possible as well. And of course, all of these people who would like to live longer, they also want to be healthy at that time, right? It's never about being kept alive or anything like that, right? It's always being with full mental and physical capabilities, be alive. And now this is what CryoDAO is working on. In different approaches, right? Fundamentally, we're working on a field called cryopreservation. Well, in fact, other types of preservation involved as well, but cryopreservation is the main thing here. Cryopreservation is a concept that's very well known, right? Cells, egg cells and sperm and cells in the lab are being cryopreserved every day. For decades taken out, and they work after it. Now, of course, this is what is being done right now. This is not what we primarily work on, even though we also have some projects in that space. But we're going a bit more on the, I would argue, high impact, hardcore side of things, right? And it's very important always to remember, if you talk about these more, hardcore approaches, that what is possible, right? What sounds impossible, what sounds like science fiction right now, might very well be standard practice tomorrow or the day after. Right? This is always, when I talk to doctors, this is always the picture where this was the first heart transplantation, right? Which was in the 1960s. This is not super long ago, right? And of course, if you would have asked doctors 20 years before the first heart transplantations, hey, what do you think about the idea of taking a heart from one human and putting it into another human? A lot of them would have probably said, hey, this sounds pretty crazy. This sounds like science fiction. This sounds impossible. And of course, now it's absolute standard practice. No one would want to miss it. Now, as I said, at CryoDAO, we're starting off at these kind of very simple things, like improving cell preservation, right? Making in vitro fertilization potentially better, even though this already works pretty well. This is a lot of basic science and so on. Then moving on to the slightly more high impact approaches, from organ preservation to organ biobanking, right? The idea that you, instead of only having a couple of hours between having an organ donor and then transplanting the heart or the liver or the kidney into another human, just have a couple of hours right now. You need to be extremely quick. The idea here would be that instead of transplanting directly, you would biobank these organs, you would store them, and then you can give the perfect organ to the perfect recipient when and if they need it. Right? It's not an easy topic, pretty difficult, but one of the areas where we're putting research dollars into. And then last but not least, a good amount of the people who are involved in CryoDAO are also into the, like really high impact topics, which would be brain preservation and whole body preservation. And here the concept is fundamentally that, of course, currently, and of course if you're a doctor you see this once in a while, there's people who get cancer at 40. Right? Of course, it's statistically not super likely, but unfortunately it happens way before, in quotation marks, their time. And as I said in the beginning, I also, if someone who's 85 and thinks they would like to live longer, in my mind this should be very well their right as well. But nevertheless, people die at a time when they would, definitely probably not like to die, their choice, but at least some, and where the disease that kills them right now might be curable in the future. Just like in the past, a lot of people died due to infectious diseases. Now infectious diseases are reasonably under control, whereas cancer, at least terminal cancer, is still very much an issue for a lot of people. Now, the fundamental idea of this cryopreservation, if you're going for the more hardcore side here, is that if you keep the part that makes you around, right, the connections in your brain, the weights of those connections, and probably some type of computational in the cells, if you keep that around, and for all intents and purposes, arguably you are still around. Of course, I might say, well, this is reviving the dead. And I would say, well, there was a time when people didn't do CPR. CPR has only been around since 1960 something. Before that, people's hearts stopped. People were like, okay, this is it. Now it's medical malpractice if you don't do chest compressions, if you don't do CPR. So in my mind, it's very well imaginably. Of course, if you're right here, and there's no soul or something like that, and of course I personally don't believe in that, once these parts are being kept around, then at the very least there's a better chance than cremation and burial, if these are your alternatives. Right? And arguably, if you have a terminal disease, your choices, do you want to be cremated, do you want to be buried, or do you want to be cryopreserved? And I'm pretty confident, at the very least, to say the chance for cryopreservation is better. Can't tell you how high it is. There's some researchers who say it's pretty high, there's some who say it's very, very low. I don't know, future will tell, but is it better? I'm very confident in saying that. So what do you actually do here for a human, right? So practically speaking, cryopreservation uses two things, or it uses basically two fundamental techniques. One would be, if you cool down a body on a cellular level, the cells don't die. It's not fully correct, they kind of self-recycle a bit, but they can still arguably maintain life. And before you go under 0 degrees Celsius, you of course don't want to have ice crystals form, right? Everybody who put a tomato into the freezer and took it out after a while You know, the structure is gone, this thing doesn't look well anymore. And of course with tissue, and most importantly the brain, of course you don't want to do this here either. So you replace all the water in the body against a cryoprotective agent, which is practically speaking a medical grade antifreeze solution. A solution that lets you cool something down very, very, very low, in our cases to at least negative 140 degrees Celsius, without ice crystal formation. And now if you do this well, then in the future, with repair, like there's still some damage, right? With repair, it is at least fundamentally, in principle, arguably potentially feasible to take the cryoprotective agent out, repair all the damage, cure the cancer that is now curable or whatever the underlying condition was that led to the patient's death in the first place, and then bring the person back. This is not something that we will be able to do in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, right? There's a tremendous amount of things that still need to be done, right? The list is very, very, very long. Topics that still need to be solved, right? But if you don't start, you're never going to get there. So at CryoDAO, we're starting to basically fund basic and applied science for these types of topics, right? To make cryopreservation better. These are the first two topics that we're currently in stages of funding. One would be improving how good cryopreservations can be done under ischemic conditions. So when there was already a time when the body was not supplied with oxygen anymore. And what would you need to do later on? This is more basic science. What would you need to do later to bring something back with like complex warming methodologies and warming equipment to, in the long run, make this work? And as was said in the introduction, apart from doing CryoDAO, which is doing basic research, I'm also running a non-profit foundation in Switzerland that runs a research institute there that does more applied and translational science, and I'm running Tomorrow Bio here in Berlin, which is like a day-to-day cryopreservation provider with like medical teams here in Amsterdam, in Zurich, and now soon also in the US, that actually, if someone says, hey, listen, if I die, I would rather be cryopreserved than cremated, then that company actually does that and then brings you to Switzerland for underground long-term storage in quotation marks until, well, all of that stuff works. Not a guarantee, by no means, just a chance, and I can't tell you how high the chance is, but again, better than cremation. These are the people who co-run CryoDAO with me, mostly people either Web3, blockchain, crypto background, DeSci background, or science background, or community building background. So all in all, we set up CryoDAO because it's an extremely underfunded field. If longevity is underfunded, cryopreservation is underfunded by an order of 2 magnitudes more. Very high impact topic once and if it works. And last but not least, it kind of needs a specific funding structure, right? This is not something where you can easily get NIH grants or any like government money, right? This is all individually funded from people who say, well, this makes sense to me, and I think this might be something that makes sense in the future. So I think that really sucks. And I decided to work on cryopreservation, even though, again, a lot of open questions and so on. But if I'm wrong, then in 20 or 30 years, I just take the pill, do the treatment from Pfizer or from Merck or from whoever, whoever wants to sell it to me, right? And then I'll live happily ever after and say, well, this was wrong. But I want to make damn sure that I'm not 85 at some point, dying of cancer. There's no good cryopreservation. There's no good longevity. So this is what CryoDAO is about. Feel free to join us, right, in any capacity. We're more than happy to get involved with anybody who wants to join us on this potentially very long-term journey, but then again, very high-impact journey. And for now, thank you so much, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Emil. Ideally, it shouldn't be bought or sold by Merck or Johnson & Johnson, but by the brand called Cryo, right?
Absolutely.
That's it. Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, Emil. Do you guys have questions? Jesse, you got one. Go for it.
Today, what is the cost of putting yourself in cold storage in the method you described just at the end of your talk?
Right. It's unfortunately still relatively expensive. It starts somewhere from 60,000 if you just want to do your brain, and then whole body is 200K. The reason why this is so expensive is because this might take 100 years, this might take 200 years, this might take tremendous amounts of time until we can bring you back, right? If it even works. So what you need to do, in our case, we put around 120,000 euros aside with a non-profit foundation in Switzerland. In detail, it's a bit more complex, but basically a foundation gets that money, they invest it, assume that they will long-term get 1 to 2% return above inflation, so that you can basically keep the principal amount inflation adjusted into the future and fund maintenance just out of the interest, just out of the return, so that the principal amount in the future can be used for revival. So you need to put a lot of money aside to make that work. One of the 3 core missions that we're currently working on is making it cheaper. But it's going to take some time. Yeah. I don't know who was first, sorry.
So, have there been laboratory, real life examples of bringing any entity back to life?
Yes, C. elegans. C. elegans is easy to cryopreserve. C. elegans keeps its memories. It's a worm memory, but it is a memory, arguably. You can cryopreserve C. elegans and bring it back. It's reproducing, it keeps its memories, but of course it's a worm. In cryopreservation, the trick is everything that's small works great, because the ratio between surface area and volume is great. You can cool it fast, you can warm it fast. And now if you're getting slightly bigger, mouse already doesn't work. It's already too big. But then again, it's too big with current technology. It might very well not be too big with technology in 20, 30 years from now. Currently you can do organs, you can do organisms, you can basically just do C. elegans and smaller stuff. And otherwise you can do organs for animal organs. Yeah.
Not human organs?
Human organs are too big. Yeah.
But not like a pig's heart or something?
Still too big.
Okay.
Like you can do rabbit kidneys,
Okay.
like this.
What's the problem with size?
So the problem is that, we're getting a bit technical, there's something that's called the critical warming rate and critical cooling rate. You need to warm and cool fast to practically, in simple terms, outrun toxicity and outrun ice crystal formation. Now, if you're too big, then the ratio between, volume grows faster than surface area. So if you're very small, you can warm up things fast. If you're big, you can't do it. You don't have the delta. This one thing that we're currently researching here, this thing is basically a machine that warms up very, very, very fast with lots of ultrasound transducers arranged in an MRI scanner for real-time guidance to warm up faster.
Is there a collaboration with ALCO in the US to have some kind of unified research in this, that we use the same techniques?
Right. So alcohol itself doesn't do much research. It's mostly 21st century medicine, A&B, who we closely collaborate with. So this whole field is very small. So I'm good friends with all of them. In fact, if I'm in the US, I'm still an ALCO member because we don't have that many US teams yet. But then again, this field has not moved for the last 20 years, right? So they're nice guys, but this field needs to move into the future, and that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
How many people are under preservation already in the
worldwide? Around 500.
And what's the distribution between US and Europe? Well,
it's almost all US. So Alco and CI, the 2 big US players, they've been around for 50 years, right? So they had more time. We're growing 10x faster than they do, with new people who join us. But then again, they have the 50 years lead time, so the people who they signed up 50 years ago, they are unfortunately dying now, right? So they have significantly more patients. We have significantly, not yet, but soon more members. In the back.
We got room for one last question. And while we do that, I would invite our next speaker, Veronika, already up to come up stage.
Looks like a lot of our challenges are from the engineering and machinery side. So do you onboard physicists and engineers, or do you plan maybe it's outsourced? Or what's the plan for this kind of?
Yeah, so it's mostly going to collaborate with research labs. Cryobiology is a very complex topic. Like building your own cryobiology lab it's not necessarily super easy. So we're with the group currently, mostly with the group in 21st century medicine, with A&B in New York and Portland, and with some groups now in the UK. Yeah. Thank you so much. Reach out anytime. More than happy to talk about this topic much longer.
Emil.